Every highway you speed down and every skyline you admire is built over the shattered bones of an empire Hollywood tried to turn into a ghost story. You've been fed a sanitized myth, the vanishing Indian, the tragic warrior who simply dissolved into the mist to make room for civilization. But they didn't just vanish, they were titans. These were the god kings of a continent that refused to kneel. We aren't talking about just historic figures to their people and even to their enemies. They felt like forces of nature. Leaders whose presence could shift the outcome of entire wars. Warriors who stood unmoved in a hail of lead, and tacticians who made the world's most decorated generals wake up in a cold sweat. But if they were gods, why is the silence they left behind so terrifying? Because the dirt doesn't lie. It doesn't care about the myths. It only remembers the blood. The truth isn't an epic duel at high noon. It's a nightmare you weren't supposed to see. It's the sound of a cell door locking in the dead of night. It's the reality of brutality most people were never meant to see. Forget the textbooks. You are walking into the tall grass of history, where the screams are still echoing if you listen close enough. Keep the lights on, because the past is finally waking up. 25. Sitting Medallion. Arikara. You were a scout for Custer, a man who saw the omens in the Valley of Death and warned him. You knew the spirits had already decided the fate of the 7th Cavalry, yet you rode toward the Little Bighorn anyway. You died in the chaotic crossfire, killed by the very Lakota and Cheyenne warriors you shared blood with, serving a commander who thought your warnings were merely scout talk. You died for a flag that never intended to protect you, and your body was left in the dust of a victory you weren't allowed to share. 24. Tall Bull, Cheyenne, leader of the fierce dog soldiers, the elite warrior society that swore never to retreat. In 1869, at the Battle of Summit Springs, you were trapped in a deep ravine, surrounded by the U.S. 5th Cavalry. You sent your wife and child away hoping they could disappear into the grass, and stood your ground with nothing but a rifle and your honor. You were shot by a marksman Buffalo Bill Cody would later claim it was his bullet to boost his circus show. In reality, you were just another body in a pile of 52, a defiant end to the most feared military society on the plains. 23. Victorio, Chihan Apache. One of the greatest tactical minds in military history. You led your people through the jagged mountains of the Southwest, ghosts that the army could never catch. But in 1880, at the Battle of Tres Castillos, the Mexican army found you. You were short on ammunition and surrounded by rocks that had become a trap. Rather than be taken alive, paraded as a trophy, or seeing your children in chains, some historical accounts suggest you took your own life with a knife to the heart to avoid capture. A warrior's final act of defiance in a world that had run out of mountains for you to hide in. 22. Wovoka, Northern Paiute, the prophet of the ghost dance. During a solar eclipse, you fell into a trance and saw a vision. The buffalo would return, the ancestors would rise, and the white man would vanish like mist. You preached peace and dancing, but the government saw an uprising. Your vision inadvertently led to the frozen blood at Wounded Knee. You lived until 1932, a quiet, haunted man who watched the 20th century erase the world you promised would return. You died of kidney failure, the last dreamer of a dream that ended in a mass grave. 21. Sequoia, Cherokee. You gave your people a gift, a written language created from nothing. You saw the Cherokee Nation become literate, building newspapers and constitutions to prove their civilization. But even the written word couldn't stop the trail of tears. In 1843, at age 73, you traveled to Mexico to find lost Cherokee bands, hoping to reunite a broken people. You died in the desert of a fever, alone, and your grave was never found. The man who gave his people their voice was silenced in a land that didn't know his name. 20. Metacom, King Philip, Wampanoag. You saw your father's kindness to the pilgrims repaid with the theft of your land. You led the deadliest war per capita in American history, nearly driving the English back into the sea. But in 1676, you were betrayed and hunted down in a swamp by a praying Indian, working for the colonists. They didn't just kill you, they quartered your body like an animal and hung your head on a pike in Plymouth for 20 years. While the settlers thanked God for their victory, your son was sold into a life of slavery in Bermuda. And if you think this is as dark as it gets, it isn't even close. 19. Powhatan, Wahun Sunika, the emperor of 30 tribes, a man who ruled with a whisper or a war club. You navigated the arrival of the English at Jamestown with the skill of a grand master, balancing diplomacy with tactical pressure. But as the tobacco trade turned the settlers into an insatiable swarm, you saw your empire eroding. You stepped down in exhaustion, handing power to your brother. You died in 1608, watching the beginning of the end, the official cause of death lost to history, though your people knew it was the weight of a dying era. Not every story here ends on a battlefield. Some ended in silence, and that's what makes them even more unsettling. 18. Squanto Patuxet. You are the friendly figure in every Thanksgiving pageant, but your life was a horror story. You were kidnapped and sold into slavery in Spain, escaped to London, and finally found a ship home only to find your entire village wiped out by a plague brought by the people who stole you. You helped the pilgrims survive because you had nowhere else to go. In 1622, you died suddenly of a bleeding from the nose. Some historians believe you may have been poisoned by other natives who viewed your cooperation with the strangers as the ultimate betrayal. 17. Hiawatha Onondaga Mohawk. The co-founder of the Iroquois Confederacy, a system of democracy so advanced it served as a blueprint for the U.S. Constitution. You were a man of grief who turned your pain into a great law of peace. But after the Confederacy was established, you vanished into the oral tradition. No grave exists for the architect of a nation. You passed into the realm of spirits, leaving behind a political legacy that the modern world would later claim as its own original thought. 16. Chief Seattle. Suquamish, Duwamish. Your name is stamped on a skyline of glass and steel, but the man behind the monument has been buried under a century of fiction. You were a giant with a voice that rang like a bell across the water, but you saw a tide coming that no war cry could stop. To save your tribe from total annihilation, you traded the ancestral bones of your fathers for a treaty that was a slow-motion execution. The famous poetic speech often attributed to you, the one about the sky weeping tears of compassion, was largely a fabrication, rewritten decades later to fit a sanitized narrative. The real warning you gave was far darker, a reminder that the dead are not powerless. You died in 1866 on a desolate reservation, living just long enough to see your people officially banned from living within the very city that bore your name. Pause. Look at your hands. Most of history has been scrubbed clean so we can sleep at night. But if you're still here, it's because you know the myths aren't enough. We are halfway through the most powerful figures of the frontier, and the stories only get darker from here. Did you know that some of these figures were so feared that their burial sites are still state secrets today? If you feel the weight of these names, if you feel the chill of the truth, comment truth if you think this history was hidden on purpose. And if you're still here, it means you're ready to hear the rest. 15. Cochise, Chiricahua, Apache. You were a man of peace until a young lieutenant falsely accused you of kidnapping and tried to arrest you under a flag of truce. That betrayal turned you into a ghost of the mountains, waging a decade of war that paralyzed the Southwest. You finally made peace on your own terms and died in 1874 of an abdominal ailment. To prevent your body from being desecrated by trophy hunters, your warriors lowered you into a secret mountain crevice and rode their horses over the site until it was indistinguishable from the earth. 14. Pontiac Odalla. You led a pan-tribal rebellion that shook the British Empire to its foundation, capturing 8 forts in a single summer. But as the years passed, your influence faded and alliances frayed. In 1769, you were stabbed in the back by a Peoria warrior in an Illinois trading post. There were rumors the British paid for the hit in silver. Others say it was a tribal grudge. The man who once united the Great Lakes died in the dirt of a back alley, far from the glory of the warpath. 13. Quanah Parker. Comanche. The son of a white captive, Cynthia Ann Parker, and a Comanche chief. You were the leader of the Quahati, the fiercest band of the Lords of the Plains. When the buffalo were slaughtered to near extinction, you chose to lead your people into the reservation to keep them from starving. You didn't die in battle, you adapted, becoming a wealthy rancher and a friend to Theodore Roosevelt. You died in 1911 of heart failure, the last bridge to a nomadic way of life that had been scorched from the earth. 12. Sacagawea. Lemhi Shoshone. You carried a newborn baby across 8,000 miles of unmapped wilderness. serving as the essential shield and translator for Lewis and Clark. Without you, they would have been ghosts in the mountains. Your reward for guiding the expansion of the United States was a quiet death at age 25, likely of putrid fever. Your children were taken to be raised by William Clark, while you became a romanticized symbol on a coin, your real life and struggles forgotten by the nation you helped map. 11. Lozan, Apache. The sister of Victorio, a woman who could ride like a man and shoot like a demon. You were the shield of your people, a prophet who could feel the enemy's approach by holding your hands to the wind. You fought beside Geronimo until the very end. When he surrendered, you were shipped to a damp, sunless prison in Alabama. The warrior who survived 100 desert battles died of tuberculosis in 1889, coughing blood into the humid air of a cage. But wait, different tribes, different lands. But the same pattern keeps repeating: betrayal, displacement, and silence. We are entering the final 10. These aren't just names, they are the icons of resistance. But before we reveal the brutal end of Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse, ask yourself, why were their deaths so controversial that the government tried to hide the bodies? The answer is more terrifying than the legends themselves. Don't click away, the most shocking reveal is less than 3 minutes away. 10. Mangus Coloradus, Apache, a giant of a man over 6 feet tall and 70 years old. You walked into a U.S. military camp in 1863 to negotiate for peace, trusting their word. Instead, they subjected you to brutal treatment while in custody, before killing you under the claim that you attempted to escape. Afterward, your remains were desecrated. 9. Osceola, Seminole. They couldn't catch you in the impenetrable Florida Everglades, so they used your honor as a weapon. They invited you to peace talks under a white flag of truce, then threw you in irons the moment you arrived. In 1838, in a cold cell at Fort Moultrie, you dressed in your finest war regalia and died of a throat infection. Even then, his body was later disturbed and parts were taken as macabre keepsakes. 8. Red Cloud, Oglala Lakota, the only native leader to win a formal war against the United States, forcing the government to burn their forts and sign a treaty. But gold was discovered in the Black Hills, and the treaty was treated like scrap paper. You lived to be 87, watching your people wither under the weight of reservation life. You died in 1909, old, blind, and forgotten in a wooden house provided by the government you once humbled. 7. Black Hawk, Sauk. You fought to reclaim your ancestral village, only to be defeated and paraded through eastern cities like a zoo animal. Even in death, you found no sanctuary. After you died of a fever in 1838, a local doctor dug up your body, cleaned your bones, and put your skeleton on display in his office. It was later moved to a museum where it eventually burned to ashes in a fire, a final cruel erasure of your physical remains. 6. Tecumseh, Shawnee. You had a dream of a single, united indigenous nation stretching from the Gulf to the Great Lakes. During the War of 1812, you were the British's most powerful ally. But at the Battle of the Thames, the British retreated and left you to face the American charge alone. You fell in the carnage, and to ensure your legend was desecrated, your body was reportedly flayed by souvenir hunters who wanted pieces of the great Tecumseh. We've reached the legends whose names are etched into history books, but whose deaths are shrouded in betrayal. These are the men who broke the U.S. Army's pride. These are the visionary leaders who were too dangerous to stay alive. Prepare yourself. This is how the giants truly fell. 5. Pocahontas, Powhatan. Forget the Disney songs. You were a child of 12 when the strangers arrived. You were kidnapped, held for ransom, and renamed Rebecca. You were paraded through the smog of London as a civilized trophy of the New World. In 1617, as you boarded a ship to finally return home, your lungs gave out smallpox or pneumonia. You died at 21, buried under a church in Gravesend, England, an ocean away from the father who missed you. 4. Chief Joseph, Nez Perce. I will fight no more forever. You led 800 people on a 1,100-mile exodus through the mountains, outsmarting generals at every turn, only to be stopped 40 miles from freedom. You were promised a return to your beloved Wallowa Valley. It was a lie. You were sent to the heat of Oklahoma and later to a reservation in Washington. You died in 1904, sitting by your fire. The agency doctor officially listed the cause of death as a broken heart. 3. Geronimo, Chiricahua Apache, the name that still makes soldiers shout before they jump. You survived 30 years of war, evading thousands of troops with just a handful of followers. But time is the one enemy you couldn't ambush. In 1909, an old man of 79, you fell from your horse after a night of heavy drinking and lay in the damp weeds all night. Pneumonia finished what the U.S. Army never could. You died a prisoner of war, never allowed to see your mountains again. 2. Crazy Horse, Oglala Lakota, the man who never allowed his soul to be captured by a camera. In 1877, you walked into Fort Robinson under a flag of truce to negotiate food for your people. It was a trap. As guards tried to force you into a guardhouse, you realized you were being imprisoned. In the struggle, a soldier ran a bayonet through your kidney. You died on the floor of the adjutant's office, refusing to sleep on a white man's cot. Your parents took your body into the hills and buried you in a secret place that remains unknown to this day. 1. Sitting Bull, Huntpapa Lakota, the holy man who united the tribes and saw Custer's end in a Sundance vision. But his own end came on a freezing December morning in 1890. Fearing his influence over the Ghost Dance movement, Native police and his own people were sent to arrest him. In the chaos of the confrontation, a bullet was fired into his chest and another into his head. Sitting Bull died in the dirt of his own doorstep, killed by the very hands he once tried to protect from the coming tide. 25 names, 25 endings, and yet somehow their stories survived. Not in monuments, but in memory. Not one of them looks like a movie poster. We are taught that history is a straight line, a march of progress, where the old world simply moved aside for the new. But look at these stories again. Look at the patterns: betrayal under a white flag, broken hearts in forced exile, skulls boiled and sold to museums. This isn't just history, it's a pattern. One that repeats so often, it stops looking like coincidence and starts looking like design. The most unsettling part isn't how they died, it's how we've been allowed to forget it. We've turned their agony into entertainment and their genocide into a genre. We wear the names of their cities and drive our cars over the ground where they bled, all while pretending the Wild West was a place of simple heroes and villains. But as you go about your day, look around you. Look at the names on the street signs. Look at the mountains. Everything you see has been renamed to hide its true identity. The people we spoke about today didn't just fade away. They were silenced so that you could stand where you are standing right now. The next time you hear someone talk about the glory days of the frontier, ask yourself, if the soil beneath your feet could scream, would you be able to stand the sound? A legend only truly dies when the last person stops whispering their name. And as long as you remember the truth, they are still here, watching from the shadows of the myths we created. Don't let the silence win. If you believe these stories deserve to be told exactly as they happened, hit the like button. Subscribe to join us as we unearth the dark corners of the past. What legendary figure should we cover next? Tell us in the comments. We're listening.